Hello and welcome to Writers Book Club. I'm your host, Michelle Barraclough, and each month I take a deep dive with an author into the writing craft and process behind one of their books. Today, you're in for a treat. My guest is the fabulous Rachael Johns, the author of an astounding 29 books. I absolutely loved this chat with Rachael. We covered so much, and yes, people, it is another long one, about an hour and a half. So if you feel like you need to break it up into part 1, part 2, part 3, that is entirely up to you, or you can just binge the whole lot. We are going to be diving in deep to Rachael's latest novel, The Workwives, a contemporary novel that explores the question of how well we really know the people we work with. The novel revolves around workwives Deborah and Quinn, who are each other's lifelines as they navigate office politics and jobs that pay the bills but don't necessarily inspire them. We've all been there. Outside work, they're also friends, but where Quinn is addicted to dating apps and desperate to find love, Deb has sworn off men. Although Deb is not close to her own mother, her teenage daughter Ramona is her life, and there's nothing she wouldn't do to protect her. But Ramona has other ideas and is beginning to push boundaries. Life becomes even more complicated by the arrival of a new man at the office. One of the women is attracted to him, while the other hoped she'd never meet him again. So that's the setup. And from there, you can't help but fall into the lives and stories of these 3 women that Rachael has created. Now, a warning, there are spoilers in this episode, like massive spoilers. So if you are the sort of person who hates a spoiler, turn off now, go and read the book, and then come back and have a listen when you're done. Rachael very generously decided she was more than happy to discuss the twists and turns of the novel so that all of you writers out there could learn from this particular novel. She also takes us through her notebook for the novel. So the original character outlines and plot points and all the other things she wrote down before she started writing. So we can really see how this novel took shape from its inception. She also read some of the detailed notes from her editors, which was so insightful. This whole episode is a real masterclass in crafting a piece of contemporary commercial fiction. Let me tell you a little bit about Rachael. She is the best-selling ABIA award-winning author of the Patterson Girls and 28 other romance and women's fiction books, including her most recent novel, the one we're talking about today, The Workwives. Rachael is currently Australia's leading writer of contemporary relationship stories around women's issues, a genre she calls life lit. Rachael's first rural romance novel, Jilted, won Favourite Australian Contemporary Romance in 2012, and her novel The Patterson Girls won the 2016 Romance Writers of Australia Ruby Award and also the 2015 Australian Book Industry Award for General Fiction, which is a very huge, very big deal. It's no surprise that Rachael continually places in Booktopia's top 50 Aussie authors poll. Rachael lives in the Swan Valley in WA with her hyperactive husband, 3 mostly gorgeous heroes in waiting, i.e. her sons, 2 ravenous cats, a cantankerous bird and a very badly behaved dog. Please enjoy this writerly chat with the fabulous Rachael Johns. Hi Rachael, how are you?
I'm good. I'm so excited to be on your fabulous podcast. I've been loving it since you started.
Thank you. Well, it's been a hot minute since we organised this. About 2 years ago, we were chatting and you said, I'd love to come on, but which book should I do? And
yes,
what about my November 2022 book? And I said, yeah, let's lock that in. And it felt like such a long time away. And now here we are.
I know. And I don't think I'd actually started even writing the book when I spoke to you. I think I was about to start writing it. And so it was actually interesting. And you'll probably ask this, but because I knew that I was going to do this podcast, I thought quite a lot about my process as I was writing it. Of course, now I've forgotten all that, so I'm picking up when we talk.
That's so awesome. I love the fact that it was influenced by the podcast. It was like, I really need to think about my process.
Well, I think it was a good time to think about my process anyway. I'd been through a bit of a rough patch and stuff, and I knew that I needed to sort of not do things differently, really, but focus on, just a few things that they'd forgotten about kind of thing. And so, yes, having you make me think, well, how do I write a book? It helped.
Oh, God, that's amazing. Well, we'll talk about that later because I think, one of the questions I have for you is what you learned about writing through this book. So that sounds like it could be quite a juicy answer there.
Hopefully.
So, well, let's start with the book. It is such a fabulous book. I always try and read the book as close to the podcast interview as possible so that it's fresh in my mind. So I just finished it a couple of days ago.
Oh, thank you.
And it ends on such a just loved it. Such a good little twist in the end, and it had me completely hooked.
Excellent. That's what we like to hear.
Absolutely. And also love the cover. Just so gorgeous.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that cover. I've been very blessed by the cover fairies the whole of my career, really. So can't really complain because, as we all know, people judge books by covers.
Yeah, they do. And when you're looking at Big W or, a bookshop and you've got all of those books, your covers always stand out, don't they?
That's good. Yeah, you hope so, because it is. There's so many books out there, which is wonderful, and I think from when I started getting published in Australia, which was about 12 years ago now, they weren't publishing as much Australian fiction as they are. And then we've also still got, of course, all the overseas stuff. But yeah, it's so great to see so many more books and availability for authors to have these publishing options. But it means, you have to do something to stand out, don't you?
Yeah, you do. And I know you love pink. I'm currently looking at, actually, we should take a little screenshot to show everybody. Rachael has pink glasses, pink hair.
Pink hair. I'm not wearing pink today, which I often do, but
it's got to have a contrast, right? To highlight the pink.
Yeah.
But you have pink on the book. Did you ask for the pink on the book?
No, I didn't. And it's funny because, I gave up asking anything quite a few years ago because I realized, I don't really know anything about design. That's not my forte. And when they used to ask me to give input at the beginning, the types of covers that I might be like to have on my book and examples of people and colours and all that sort of stuff and themes, whatever I did never came on the cover. So I sort of gave up. And so no, but it was lovely to have a bit of pink on there.
And the beautiful spine, like that is just going to stand out so beautifully. I don't know why I'm holding it up. This is a podcast and not a YouTube video, but I'm keep holding the book up.
Have a look.
We will take a screenshot. Also, I loved how just going onto your website and having a look at all of your books together on the website. They look so good together. So yes, you must be really, really thrilled with all the covers. Anyway, moving on from covers into the meat of the book, Rachael, please tell us how the Work Wives came to you, how it all came into being. What was your inspo? How did it happen?
Yeah, well, it was interesting because I was thinking about writing something else that I've had an idea for, well, I would say it's not really an idea. It's the seed of an idea. And I wasn't kind of feeling very confident about it. But I was thinking, time to start is looming. I'm going to have to make myself get excited about that book and work out the characters. And then I was doing a podcast, actually, with Brand New Magazine, I think it's called. And the lady who was interviewing me said that she was really looking forward to having Friday night drinks with her work wives. And I'd actually been just reading around that time a book called The Bestseller Code. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yes, I have.
Yeah, because I can't remember who wrote it. It's on my shelf.
Yeah, it was two. Was it two people that wrote it?
Two people.
Yeah.
It's like they looked at the some scientific science stuff that I don't understand with bestsellers like Danielle Steele and Nicholas Sparks and J.K. Rowling and Dan Brown and all that, and worked out what was the common sort of threads through all of their books. And one chapter was on titles. And so I was thinking I guess I had the title sort of thing in my head that certain titles work better than others. One of the titles they said works really well was 3 words, the sort of an adjective and then a noun, if I remember right. So I used to be an English teacher, so it's terrible that I don't remember which is which and all that kind of stuff. But it's a long time ago now. So, they were talking about also that titles that people can really, as soon as you know the title, you understand, the concept of the book. It's very strong. And I personally, I think probably about 3 or 4 of my books, I have started with titles. And I actually find we know as writers that nothing is easy, but I find when I've got a really strong title that sort of it not easier says the wrong word. It comes together a bit more. I can't think of the word,
but is it like it sets the tone?
Yes, it sets a tone. It sets sometimes maybe the theme. It does exactly what those people in that book were saying. It gives you kind of an idea of what the story will be about. I mean, very vague idea, but it grounds me in my writing kind of thing. And I love titles, so I get very excited if I've got a really good title, and it sort of, I think, makes me more excited about the book, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Caveat there is that the title can change between when I have one to later, but that doesn't matter. As long as I've got a title that I love while I'm writing it, and that I feel is strong, it seems to just help make the writing process smoother. Maybe that's the word. I don't know. It helps me focus. And so I heard her say she was looking forward to having Friday night drinks with her work wives. And because I was thinking about title, I just suddenly thought the work wives, that fits exactly with what they were, saying in that book. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's such a good title for a book. And, I've been on tour for a couple of weeks, and some people have said they know what a work wife is, and some people have never heard the term. But, there's work husbands and work wives, sort of people that you have a connection with at work, and they help you through the highs and the lows of that. This woman that I was speaking to, she was talking about her women friends at work kind of thing. And I just thought, oh, that's a really I do write books that are about female relationships and, those types of relationships that we have, family, friends, strangers sometimes. And I'd never written about work friends. And I thought it's such a really interesting friendship, because often the people you spend, or before COVID, the people you work with are the people that you spend more time sometimes with than with your partner or your kids. And, yet you may not have actually met them if you hadn't worked together, because you may be of different ages, generations. You may have different cultural backgrounds, different hobbies and interests, but something makes you click at work, and then that friendship grows. So I thought that was like a kind of really interesting idea. So I got super excited about that. And then luckily, I think I was editing a previous book, or, just finishing writing or something. And so I had time to sort of just let the idea mull in my head. And it was one of those ideas. And I feel like I've written, I think, 18, or count the next one, 19 full-length novels and a few more novellas and stuff. I think in that time, probably 3 books maybe have just been strike of inspiration, and kind of, I think some people call them fairy dust books, where it just kind of all comes together. I was desperately in need of one of these books, because the one before that I rewrote. I got rid of 65,000 words and had to start,
oh God, right.
So, I think it was time to have one of those, just one of the ones that
pours out of you.
Yeah. And that's kind of what it was. Yeah. It was a real joy to write. And I said I really needed that, because I think otherwise I was about to throw myself off a cliff or give up writing completely. But because I had a couple of weeks to mull around, I just sort of started thinking about characters and then, what might come between them. And it all sort of came together in my head. I mean, obviously, as I write, things change. But from that initial seed of inspiration, and then I guess I like to say that writing a book is a bit like doing a jigsaw puzzle without the picture. I have lots of little seeds of ideas or things I would like to write about or explore, articles I've read, a job that I think is interesting, those sorts of things, an issue or a thing, but I have to wait till they sort of connect with other ideas, because on their own, they're not strong enough.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of other things for this book. I'd read an article about online dating app addictions. And then I'd read, doing the rounds around the time was that article from the 1950s that's on the internet, people were sharing.
The housewives.
Yeah, how to get a husband in 129 ways. So there was lots of little things that came together after that initial idea. But yeah, that was definitely the first. I hope I've answered that question properly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So all the inspiration came from different places. But isn't it funny when you do get an idea? So you had that idea of the work wives, then suddenly that article that you read, 6 months before, or that other thing that just like everything almost conspires to come into the idea as well. And you think, oh, that could fit and that could fit.
And it's like one thing sparks another. It's like a domino effect, because And you're open to it as well. Like, I guess if you're listening to, say, a podcast or an interview with another author, and you think, oh, adoption or dating apps or something like that, you think, I think all writers are, the ideas all the time.
Yeah.
Almost on the lookout, just hoping that the next amazing idea is around the corner. So, I do save articles that I see, or, even pictures, or I'm not a very visual writer, but little things I'll think, or I'll write in my notebook, I'd like to write about circuses or whatever.
Yeah.
And that might take years to get there, but has to come together with other stuff. So you're constantly on the lookout. But I do feel like some books are more ready to write straight away, and others, I've got other ideas I might never actually write, because they might never sort of joined together with the right other ideas, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And those ideas might have to wait for the next book or the one after that. It must have been lovely with 28 or 20. I thought there were 29, but 20.
I think it's 29, including
the novellas.
10,000 word novella. That was so well. I was like, can I count 10,000 words as a book?
Definitely. It's a book.
It's probably one of the hardest to write because I'm a rambler in like pen on the page. And so, writing 10,000 words, I think it's a miracle that I managed to write a story in 10,000 words.
Well, I just read Claire Keegan's book that was on the Booker Prize shortlist, and it's a novella. And
really,
they call that a book. So, it's a book, Rachel. So
we'll say 29 books. All right.
After 29 books, it must be absolutely wonderful when you strike upon an idea like The Work Wives and think, I have not written about women working together before. And so I'm going to take that and run with it.
Very true, because it is, as the more books you write, it's harder. So in some ways it's harder, or I think I go through stages. So I had a few years where I was very much thinking, oh my gosh, will I ever have another idea? And then after the joy of writing this book and a few other things that I've done recently just to really find the love for writing again, suddenly the ideas are sparking. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to write faster so I can, do this stuff. But it is difficult because you want to write the same kind of book because that's what your readers obviously come to you for. But I do not want to be writing the same book over and over again for me and for my readers. But I also think it's very hard in contemporary fiction to find, that's why, I guess we're all sort of ears out to those modern things like dating app addictions and things like that, gaslighting, which is quite, coercive control, all the things that are current, the Me Too movement. I think, a lot of people pounce on those because in contemporary fiction, there's nothing taboo anymore. It doesn't matter if someone has a baby outside of marriage. It's okay to be gay. Often, laws, like adoption laws and stuff have changed, so it's not closed. You can do DNA testing to find you can find people on Facebook. You've always got a mobile phone, so why, you can't be stranded somewhere. I joke that I think these historical fiction authors, they reckon they've got it hard because they've got to do all this research and they get it right. But hey, it's all there. They can Google it all. It's all happened. They can go away for 10 months and have a baby, whereas so it is hard, I think, in contemporary fiction. I mean, I'm tongue in cheek here. Every fiction genre has its hard parts, but I do think that, it is exciting when you think about sort of a concept that you haven't either read about much before as well or written yourself, because, that's one of the things we need to do, keep things fresh.
Absolutely. And it sounded like you needed something fresh to really reignite. So what had happened? Had you lost your mojo? You just really felt?
I think I was burnt out, to be honest. I think it was a combination of that and all the pressure that I was putting on myself, because this is my full-time job, so it has to pay my bills. So if I'm not feeling creative or have a great idea, I've got the pressure where I think, well, I still have to write a book, but I don't want to put a terrible one out because, that's not long-term. That's not going to keep my career going. But I need to pay the bills. So it's like the pressure was kind of just getting to me. And I think it's also, social media is wonderful, but it's got the flip side that we are so connected to everyone. We can see what everyone else is doing. And if you're going through a bad patch, someone says, I've written 10,000 words today and you're struggling to write 200. It's very easy to sort of just feel woe with me and get worse and worse into that. We can be tagged in terrible reviews. Which
why do people do that?
Yeah, I know. I read my reviews I have learnt to read them when I know I'm in an okay place to read them. It's not going to be water off of that back, but it's going to be like, oh, well, that's one opinion. I know I don't love every book I read, whatever. But when I was in sort of a really doubtful, anxious time, I did get a couple of people tag me in bad reviews, and it's like you get a tag and you think, oh, I'll read that and then it's horrible, or not horrible, but it's saying it really plays into your belief in or non-belief, the doubt that you can't do this. And so I think it was a combination of things. But then, I really struggled with Outback Secrets. I wrote 30,000 words of one sort of heroine with the same hero, and then that wasn't working for me. And I think it was more in my head. I had writing friends who were saying to me, you've got all the elements of a romance. You've got two characters who have conflict and they've got good backstories and all the stuff you need. but I just could not get it to work. And then I started again, wrote another 35,000 and the same thing happened. So then, of course, I'm really doubting my ability. So what I did to get over it kind of thing was I did go and see a doctor. I saw my doctor I've had since I was 12. She's wonderful. And she said, you got to talk to someone about this. And because I wanted to keep writing books. I don't want to do anything else. I can't do anything else as well. That's a bit of a problem now. And so I talked to someone. I also started on anxiety medication and I took a month off social media and I really reminded myself, like it's so easy, I think, to look at what you don't have or you haven't achieved rather than what you do have or what you have achieved. All I ever wanted to do was write books because I loved that. And so I need to earn my living. I was a teacher. So I thought, I want to earn a teacher's wage. Now I do that, sometimes a lot more, sometimes, and so I feel like I've really reminded myself, movie deals, New York Times bestsellers, none of that actually matters. What matters is that I'm writing books that I enjoy and that other people enjoy too, even if it's a smaller amount, then as long as I can keep doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And so I've really tried to be kind to myself in the last year to remember why I love doing this and to focus on that rather than all the things that are out of my control.
Yeah. Oh, you're such an inspiration, Rachel. Thank you for sharing that because
that's okay.
They're the things that all writers struggle with. And you are 29, as we have established, 29 books down the track. And
I'll just say quickly, I think you're right. All writers, no matter what, if you haven't got a book published, you're so focused on the people that do rather than enjoying the journey of getting there, and learning and thinking. I spoke to a new writer a couple of weeks ago and she said to me, how do I get published? And I said, what's the book kind of about? And then she said, it's my first one. And I said, well, to be honest, a lot of people don't get their first book published. Some people don't get the first. I took 17 years or 15 years. Hopefully no one takes that long. But, and she said, yeah, I've heard the first book can be a failure. And I said, it's not a failure. It is it's part of the learning process. And, it's so easy to focus on publication rather than focus on just writing a good book and having fun with it. And so then when you do get that first published, it's like, well, that was great, but now I want the next thing.
Yeah.
And so we're always just what we want. And that, I don't think that's good for our creativity, but it's also not a fun way to live life. Really. About what you don't have rather than being happy for what you do.
Yeah. And we're the first to remind our kids of this,
Exactly.
Well, look at what you have got.
We're harsh on ourselves or, we don't practice what we preach.
Yeah.
We're trying to practice what I preach.
Yeah. Same, aren't we all? So you had the idea for The Workwives. How did the process of writing the novel then roll out for you? Did it follow the same process as your other novels or was it a little bit different for this one?
I think it did pretty much follow the same process. Probably not of the last few books, as I said, because even before Outback Secrets, I was kind of getting stressed, I suppose, and it wasn't an enjoyable process. But I did a lot of the same things. Like I don't do a huge amount of planning beforehand, but I do think as much about character as I can. I know we're not on video for the thing, but I've got a notebook in front of me. I keep a notebook for each book. It gets messier and messier as I go on. But the things I wrote down in the beginning, like I just wrote, I try and sort of center myself in what the book's going to be about. So the first page of this book says The Workwives, and then I wrote a tagline before I wrote anything else, which I don't always do. But how well do you really know the people you work with? And then I said it's a feel-good contemporary fiction about friendships in the workplace and online dating and the lies we tell those closest to us in the name of protecting them. So I really tried to nut down what the book was about and then who the main characters were. Then I write sort of what the issues might be like. And that's really all the planning I kind of do. I've got like one page. I write a little bit about character. And it's interesting because, as I said to you before we started, I think because I was doing this podcast, I wrote some things along the way, and I wish that I had done this with every book because it's interesting to think you knew more than you did. But so every time something happened in the book that I didn't think was going to happen, so I don't plan a lot, but I have a vague idea. And this one, as I said, it was more solidified in my head. But I wrote here, things I didn't know when I started. This was for you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Most major plot points. What exactly someone had done to Deb. I'm not going to say the name.
Yep.
I didn't know what that was. I just knew that there was going to be sort of Deb had a bad relationship experience, but I didn't exactly know why. I didn't know why till I got to that stage kind of thing.
Really?
And I said, I didn't know about another character's wife and what they were, what their issue kind of, I don't know, are we doing spoilers here or not? Okay.
Oh, well, we can, but we'll put a spoiler alert. It's totally up to you, Rachel.
Well, yeah. So I didn't know that Oscar's wife had early onset Alzheimer's, or that he was even married. I didn't know that Lucy's dad was a priest.
I loved him.
Yeah,
for a minute, I thought he was going to be a love interest there.
I know. Someone said that too. And the funny thing was he was actually a Catholic priest when I first put him on the page. And then my publishers were like, oh, I think that's a little bit too.
How does he have a kid?
But an Anglican priest. I didn't know about Mrs. D's character at all. Didn't plan her in the part, or that she would have a stroke, or that she would have quite a big impact in the reveal of what was going on. I didn't know about a rape. I didn't know. Oh, this is something that I said. I didn't know that Deb's childhood had Munchausen by proxy, fictitious disorder by imposed on another, which you probably think, well, she doesn't. Because that was taken out in the Rachael edit. So I really laid on. I think we'll get to edits too. I didn't know that Deb had a psychology degree. I didn't know what Sydney's problem with Lucy was. So you can see how much I didn't know. I didn't know that Quinn's, what Quinn really wanted in life, which I didn't know I did. And also it was going to be a post-COVID office, but I removed all the references to the pandemic later on. So yeah, that's sort of a list of what I didn't know. So you can see there's a lot of major things I sort of just trusted my characters to kind of tell me. I guess what I did know was that there was something that was going to come between them. It was going to be a man, and it was going to, cause some sort of drama.
I think that the fact that you didn't know some of those really major things is what kept it fresh and surprising for me as a reader. Were you sort of saying, well, how can I make things worse, or what could this issue be? I mean, even the story of what happened to Deb back in New York and why she had been sort of effectively on the run with her daughter Ramona and not on social media and just keeping a really low profile. And that was quite shocking.
Yeah. And it's hard because, you've got, I think it's a fine line between something that's shocking enough, but is believable too. And I was a bit worried about that. Yeah. So, in this writing world, we always hear pantsers and plotters. I joke that I'm a prayer. I just pray that it will work out kind of in the end. Another thing which I do sometimes is looking through it. I can't see it here, so maybe it's more of a rural romance thing. I think you've got a question about that. But another thing that I do is I always write a list of things that people need to speak about.
Right. That's such a good idea because, for example, that Deb eventually has to tell Quinn and Ramona
what happened.
And then she ends up telling Tristan as well about what happened to her in New York. But I was thinking, how much detail is she going to go into with her daughter about that? Yeah. And so you're sort of waiting for her to have that conversation. But that in itself is how's she going to handle that? I was constantly just wondering, you did such a great job, Rachel. I'm not articulating it really well.
But thank you.
All of those points that you brought up about things you didn't know just came at the right moment. And you can just tell as a reader, I felt like I was just in such capable hands.
Oh, thank you. Well, I was going to say, so read that talking and things like that. I find also if I don't, I try and write 2,000 words a day. Don't always get there. And as I said, I've become really kind to myself and that, I don't beat myself up about that because some days it evens out in the end. But I find that if I have a list, and I can't find it in this book, my book is my notebooks are very messy and they're all like, I just randomly write stuff in there and then wonder why I can't find it when I'm sure I've written a note about this somewhere. But one of the things that I do usually have is a list of all the things that the main characters need to talk about with each other. And then when I'm writing a scene, I kind of think, well, hang on, I look at that list sometimes if I'm struggling with, I'm not sure what's happening next and think, well, is it time for any of those conversations to happen? And some are small little things like the fact, that Quinn's parents live in Adelaide or whatever, and I think who she got to tell about this or previous relationships that they may have had. So some are major, some are small, but they can help me work out if I'm not so sure what to write next. I go, well, hang on, is it ready? Are we ready for this conversation? And
yeah. And I guess too, just always thinking in the back of your mind as a novelist, as such an experienced novelist, knowing, well, is this essential to either character development or moving the plot forward? Do you have that in the back of your mind as well?
Yeah, I think I do. Like, I'm a rambler, as I said, so I do write long.
You are preaching to the converted. I am a rambler from way back on the page and in person.
Live. Same. This will be a long podcast. Sorry, everyone.
Sorry, everyone.
So this book lost 40,000 words in it. So it was very long. I think it's about 135. It was 170 something when I, first handed it in, and a lot of stuff had to go. But that didn't have to, it's hard to explain. It didn't have to go because it wasn't necessarily moving the plot forward, but we had too many different plots. Like, there was a lot of office stuff more in there. And so we basically removed all that. I find it hard sometimes to get into the chapter and how to start it. But then I make sure every day when I write, when I'm about to write a chapter or a scene, I always start in my notebook with chapter 24. And then it says here, the point, showing Deb letting down some walls, getting to know each other, and her ashamed about her past growing up. And then I've written walking with the dog, or with his dog. And then I've written, talk about his parents, I've written the location of where it's going to be, and just a few other. So I kind of write, sometimes there's snippets of dialogue. I just scribble that as I come, it's something on head. But so each day I kind of think, well, what is the point of this scene? What do I have to show? And, sometimes it's easier than others. Sometimes I can definitely know what's going on. But I try not to write a scene that's not got, a reason to be there.
And I was going to ask you about what happens when you sit down to write a scene, because as I was flicking through for prepping for the interview, I thought, how does she start each chapter? And you often start with dialogue. Is that something that sort of...
Just have a look. Yeah. I think I actually do. I do try and do a bit of both. So,
there's a mix. Sometimes it's like an action and then jump into some dialogue.
And I think I probably spend longer on how to start a chapter and how to end a chapter than the stuff in the middle, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, tell me about that.
Well, often I find that the end, I've written more than I need. I'm thinking, how am I going to end this chapter? We need to put a sort of a hook at the end of most, ideally a hook at the end of each chapter so that people don't want to close the book and go to sleep but it's not always easy. And I think especially in the types of books that this, is not a crime novel. There is elements of crime in here, but it's not a crime novel, so a thriller. And so in romance and in general contemporary fiction, it can sometimes be harder to get that hook at the end of the chapter because, it might be a more gentle story but I really try. But then sometimes I've worked out now, often, this is through writing a few books and editing with people, that the last paragraph can just be cut and I've actually got a hook already. So that's a tip for maybe people, I can just throw it at the end. Sometimes I've gone on longer than I need to. And I'm thinking, oh, golly, how am I going to read it? And then I just go, okay, I'm just going to leave it. Yeah. And then when I go to edit, the editor or me, if it's depending on, will suddenly go, don't think we need this, or the chapter can end here, this question. Yeah. So I do probably overwrite and then realize, that's something I've noticed in my work, that definitely, now I think that I've noticed it, I don't necessarily always write that extra chapter or extra paragraph, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Sometimes I still do. Or if I'm wondering how to end, I suddenly go, hang on, Rachel, remember, sometimes you've gone on too long. And so I'll look back. And of course, then it's painful because if you're aiming for 2,000 words a day and then you have to delete 200, damn it. But I remind myself that it's better to have a good end than 200 extra words in my word count.
Yes, 1,800 effective words and rein in the rambler.
Better, yeah. Quality over quantity.
Because you've got 3 protagonists or 3 points of view too, you must always be thinking, well, I don't want to get people so invested in this character. Like the next chapter is going to be Ramona or Quinn. So I sort of want people to come back to Deb and be keen to come back to Deb, but I want them to also then get fully invested very quickly in what's happening with the other 2 characters as well.
Yeah, I think that's one of the hardest things is writing multiple point of view chapters or characters. Like, you want people to be invested equally in each one. You want them to sound different, which is why, so for this book, I've written another one, the Art of Keeping Secrets, for example, has all women around the same age. They've got kids the same age, they're kind of it. And so it's harder to distinguish those, but you really have to make an effort to make sure that each voice is slightly, different. So ideally, I do have at the top of each of these chapters, Deborah, and then Quinn. So it does tell, but ideally you shouldn't need that even. It should be straight away, you'll know somehow whose voice you're in because of their attitude, the way they talk and all, what else is going on. But I think, that's one of the hardest things is making sure they're different enough. So it's easier in this book because we've got 15-year-old, 28-year-old or something, and a 42-year-old. Not massive, and then we've got an 80-year-old character who doesn't get point of view, but, then there's enough distance that their life experiences are going to be different, even the way they talk sometimes. And of course, then you add personality in there as well as age, and that helps. But the other problem with writing multiple point of view characters is you don't want to get someone, as you said, to get so connected to one that they really don't care about what's happening with the others.
Yeah.
So I think the trick there as well is that the stories have to be connected enough that you can't miss, and that's really hard. And I'm not saying I do it perfectly. The other thing you juggle or you think is I've learned probably not to do a pattern. And even in my real romances where, you got hero and heroine, if I set up a pattern of hero, heroine, hero, heroine, hero, heroine, sometimes it's almost like that. But then I'm like, well, what's going to happen? And that I'm more likely then to put a chapter in that really doesn't need to be there because I'm thinking
you're trying to wedge it in.
Yeah, I need his point of view or something.
Yeah.
And so it was the same with this book. I was kind of aware that I didn't want to lock myself into a pattern because so sometimes I think there's a couple of places where you get maybe two of Debs in one go, and then you might see Ramona, Quinn, Deb, Ramona. But at the same time, you don't want half the book to be with Deb and only a quarter of each of the other two. So it's something I'm aware of, but don't let it sort of dictate too much, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because I guess too, you're right. As the plot is unfolding, certain characters are going to be able to tell that part of the story better. Yeah. Like when they're looking for Ramona, that has to come from Deb.
Yeah, exactly. Because Quinn hasn't got this Deb's daughter. Quinn's not going to be, she's going to be concerned, but she's not going to be that heart-pounding fear that a mum has if her daughter is missing.
Yeah.
And then I think the thing with a book like this, this, if you have only one point of view, there's challenges. If you have multiple point of view, there's challenges. This one particularly, I had a few things that I wanted to come out and working out who they would right near the end or close to the end, working out who would get certain things at the right time. I had to make sure that the reader didn't get something before, that bit challenging towards the end. And I think I moved around a few chapters here or there
in the edit
after when I realized, oh no, it's better that, we don't know this about Oscar before this person finds out this about Oscar,
Yeah.
That was a little bit of a challenge. So, but again, then there was times where I thought, and now I'm remembering, I did need a middle chapter because I didn't want Deb and then Deb say when a drama was happening, I felt like we needed a break kind of thing. So it was a matter of then working out, well, how do I make this chapter matter? I feel like we need another point of view here. So I need to make something important in that point of view, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense. Just while we're on characters, one of the listeners, Deb Jordan, thank you for sending in your question, Deb.
Hi, Deb.
She says, I love Rachel's relatable dialogue and the way each character has a unique voice. Do her characters develop as the story emerges, or are they fully formed from the beginning? So I know you said you have an outline when you're sort of your initial brainstorming.
It's definitely more that they develop as I go.
Yeah.
Some I know a lot more about before I start, but I've learned that I just have to start and hope that pray that they reveal themselves to me, because otherwise that's just the way my brain works. And if I try and know everything about them beforehand, I'll be waiting I'll never write. And so I do also, in my notebook, I have got a page beat or a page and 2 pages for each character. And it's interesting to look back. I think if you look in my real romance notebooks, I often have a lot more per character. Whereas here I've got the most about Deb, I think. She's 42, single mum, works in payroll, has a 15-year-old daughter. I said her flaws, she's a helicopter parent, overprotective. And then I wrote a bit about her backstory. But as I told you earlier, I didn't know a lot of exactly what the detailed backstory was. I just knew certain, sort of how I wanted her to feel, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I did put her goal, which, you hear in writing, goal, motivation and conflict. I don't always have all that sort of stuff. But with Deb, I said basically, and I think often, in writing, we're told it has to be really concrete, visible goal and stuff. And I just don't work necessarily like that. And so a lot of that stuff comes to me as I go. But I had the goal for Deb was just to protect and provide for Ramona and herself to avoid trauma and pain. And then I put fear. I do like using, for each of my characters, I often use a book at the beginning called, I think it's 16 Master Archetypes for Heroes and Heroines. It's quite an old book. So I usually also choose an archetype for each character. So for Deb, I said she was a nurturer. She looks out for Quinn and she looks out for her daughter. And then this shows I did like literally hardly anything for Quinn. I've just written 28, single, looking for love, works in sales and marketing, which changed. Oh, she's marketing, I suppose.
Well, yeah, digital marketing.
Yeah, literally all I've got is flaw, addicted to dating apps. Backstory, grew up in a huge Italian/Irish family, strong Catholics. And then I've got, she's a free spirit, but I haven't written much else. So yeah.
Okay. So she developed more on the page.
Yes, she definitely did. And Ramona changed quite a lot.
Oh, did she? Tell me about her.
Well, so Ramona, I've literally written, flaw, doesn't fit in. Yep. Ramona leaves to learn she doesn't need to fit in and that her mum did what she thought was best. Needs to learn life isn't always black and white. But I also thought, we're talking about those, issues, current topics and stuff. With Ramona, I thought, or maybe she's not sure about her sexuality. I thought maybe she would be asexual or, and sort of working those things out. But then, because I was trying, in romance, obviously my romances are pretty much a straight love story kind of thing. I thought, well, I want to, explore some diversity and put some different sort of things in there. But then on the page, I met Elijah and I was like,
so gorgeous.
I'm in love with Elijah. Ramona has to be in love with him as well. So that kind of just threw that out the window. And so her character really took the most or changed the most. And I really didn't know what I wanted to do with her. And I just kept writing things and then hoping, for the best. One other thing I do usually do, and it's not on my wall anymore because I've got the next books up on my wall, but I usually have a Post-it note with each of the characters' name and one word that sort of reminds me what their sort of personality is. I do this with the women's fiction more than the romance because the romance, I've got a hero and heroine. It's easier to sort of keep track. But as I said, when you're writing multiple women or female characters, it's a bit harder sometimes. So I will have I think with Deb, I had overprotective. With Quinn, I had addictive. And then with Ramona, I think I had lost. So I kind of think about each point, if I'm struggling in their chapter or scene, I think, well, what's their overarching sort of thing at the moment? It's, stopping them or directing their thoughts and their actions. And that helps me really focus on or how they behave in a scene or how they react to something, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And that's such a great idea because in a way it's making you also focus on the thing that needs to be resolved in their character journey.
Exactly.
Right.
It is usually, I guess, a flaw or something that's not making them whole kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of, it's about the arc, I suppose. Yeah.
Oh, that's so good. I wanted to ask you about the teenage characters because I know you have teenage boys.
Yes.
3 boys, right?
I have 3 boys and I've been away for 3 weeks and they're supposed to look after their own bathroom and their own toilet and the area. I just walked in there this morning because I've been so busy. I hadn't had a proper look and I was like, OMG, this is disgusting. Teenage boys are feral.
Also, they can never, ever seem to make the connection between the empty toilet roll and the rubbish bin that's right there.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, we digress. But you write teenage girls to perfection. You've got, Ramona, obviously, and then the teenage girls in her orbit. And there are a few of them.
There are actually. There's, I think, 5 teenage girls, I suppose, in this book. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're all very different. How did you go about getting those teenage girls so right?
Well, I'm glad you think they're right. I don't have teenage girls, but I think there's a couple of things. I have friends with teenage girls, and so I hear all their, different kind of complaints to, that I have with teenage boys. Some similar, but there are a few differences. And the other thing is, I can't remember what happened last week, but I remember my teens quite well, and I have really good friends from school, and I remember how those relationships were very tense and heated, and wonderful. 1 minute you're besties and the next day you're annoyed about something, and, we're writing letters to each other and pouring our hearts out. First crushes that felt like the end of the world if, they didn't work out, and just also, wondering where do I fit in the world and I think so, although things like social media, we didn't have any social media, thank God, I reckon. But, all technology's changed, TV shows have changed, music might move on, but the emotions that everyone writes about and all those things, the emotions that people experience at that age have been the same across the generations, And so I think it's about in all characters, not just, when you're writing one that's different to your own, is I think just drilling down on those universal emotions that everyone, so now, whether you're, and even books like, alien romance and stuff that's out there now, the reason people like it is because they still understand the universal themes and emotions that people experience. So by saying that, it's funny because I think there's a difference between writing for teenagers and writing about teenagers. And I had a couple of people, it's been lovely this once I've got Ramona, I've been meeting readers and stuff. And one lady said to me a couple of weeks ago, I think she was probably in her 60s. She said, "Oh, you did the teenage character so well. I laughed when she wrote LOL or laughing out loud or something." And I thought, well, that's proof that I have done it wrong. Because, this was written a year and a half ago or so. But, now all we hear about is if you use a laughing out loud emoji or whatever, that you're a boomer. You're basically, that's just showing how out of touch you are.
Yeah, you idiot.
But I think the good thing is, the majority of my readers, well, I do have a couple of teenage readers, I do know definitely. And maybe more that I don't know about. My readership is probably, I'm guessing, primarily, 30 plus. Mainly women, although I do have some men who read as well. So although I'm writing about a teenager, as long as those people feel connected and they feel like I've done right, that's it's work.
Yeah.
Whereas, if I was writing a YA, I'm not sure that I would have got it right.
Yeah, that's a whole other world, isn't it? But one of the things I really love about your writing is that even those, 5 teenage girls, but even the minor characters, they've got layers as well. So you show even the kind of the trope of the bully. She's not just a one-dimensional character. You do show her vulnerability and what her wound is. And it's only a couple of paragraphs in that little scene towards the end. But, how lovely to get that layered view of even a minor character.
That's probably something I've learned, I think, in the years over writing, because it's bitten me on the bum a couple of times where I've written villain characters and then had to not rewrite them, but people have said with my first book, Jilted, I wrote a horrible character in that. And then the reader's like, we want more of this series or more of this, town kind of thing. And I hadn't got anyone really that I could use except this villain, this horrible person. And so I wrote a story about her and I had to really redeem her. I had to work out, why she is the way she is. I told you I'm a slow learner. That's why it took 15 years. So then I wrote a villain in something to talk about and talk of the town, never intending to write her story either. But then readers really wanted, half of them wanted a story. The publisher wanted my story. That's the book I've written next. And I then had to think, geez, why is she such a bitch? I had to work that out. So I think I'm learning, that even if a character is horrible, none of us are all bad or all good. We've all got layers, like you said. But it's good I never planned on writing her story for a start. So that was, but I realized, I didn't just want her to be there as a plot device.
Yeah.
I wanted to show that, as you said, that she has a reason for being like this, and also give her a bit of a redemption arc as well, even if it's not quite, 100% there. But it's another thing I didn't know. I didn't know why she was horrible. And, so that sort of came out as as I got to know them, I thought about it. As I write things on the page, I think, oh, maybe this could be why, So it's very much organic and working all that out as I go.
And they say that the villain is the hero of their own story, don't they?
Yes, exactly. I'm sure what's her name? Can't even remember her name now. I'm sure she thinks she is Sydney.
Sydney. Yes, Sydney. So talking about characters makes me think about your amazing dialogue. And we touched on it earlier, but I think your dialogue is genius. It always feels very realistic and it flows really naturally. But because, some sections by their nature are dialogue heavy, you do this clever thing where instead of a dialogue tag, so it's not he said, she said, she said, she said in a lot of cases, you either leave the tag off altogether or you incorporate an action. So for example, on page 22, so this is just a little section, but it's when the teenage girls, Sydney and Kenzie, are talking, and Ramona. So they're asking her over to their place. And Ramona says, "Really? Of course." Sydney glanced up briefly from her phone where her thumb was flying back and forth across the screen. "Unless you've got to get home or something." "No, I can come." Her mum wouldn't be home from work for another few hours. "Awesome." Kenzie grinned and hitched her bag over her shoulder. "Let's go." So I just thought that was a really good example because at no point in that little section do you say, "she said," or "she exclaimed," or anything like that. It's either no tag or it's an action. Like, "Of course." Sydney glanced up briefly from her phone. And so you can sort of visualize the action and this sort of tone of her voice just because of that action. I just think it's very clever. Is that something that you've kind of learned over time as well? Or?
I think so. It would be interesting actually I might do this myself, look back on my first book and see how things like that have changed.
Yeah.
But it's very much, I mean, you know this, and I'm sure all our listeners your listeners know this, that
they're our listeners.
Your reader, our listeners today, they have to be, you have to be a reader to be a writer. And I think writers read often differently to readers, and sometimes that's annoying because it would be nice to be able to switch off and, really enjoy a story. And I do. I loved books and I enjoyed them. But I think I've picked up the way I write dialogue, I've picked up over the years of reading people like Marianne Keyes, Liane Moriarty, my favorite American author, Eleanor Hildebrand, and realized that, if your characters are quite strong, technically you should be able to have a scene where you can tell who's talking without any tags or any dialogue because they're so unique. Now that's pretty hard. But, and then action tags can break. So I like a mix of things. Sometimes there'll be a he said, she said. And sometimes there's areas where there's a lot of dialogue and there's not necessarily action tags. So occasionally there I will just say, Ramona said or whatever, just so you ground, but then the next person I probably won't, because if it's only two people, that's, she's probably not going to say something straight away. So I think it's a matter of, to me, I like a variety of dialogue. And so I do think, if I've written a lot of action tags for a while, I think, I don't want one of them, So I guess I kind of think, Yeah. At no time, and this is a big book, it's 500 pages. Yes, I told you, ramble on a page.
I loved it. At no time did I ever have to go back and think, oh God, I'm lost in this conversation. You know how sometimes some books you read and there are no dialogue tags, but you just go, oh, where am I? Who's?
And I think that really annoys me. So I think
annoying.
It's something, I think what you do as a writer is the things that piss you off, you're very careful. And, that doesn't mean I probably do lots of things that will piss other people off, but they don't annoy me. So I do them. You know what I mean? Like, but things that that annoy me when I'm reading a book, I'm very careful that I don't do that. Or I try not to do that. I'm not saying I always succeed, but that's why I think reading books, that the books you love help you, but also books that, you don't like, they can really help you know, well, hang on, I don't want to write a book like this, or I don't want to do what this. So all reading is important.
So we talked a little bit about your process and that you are pretty much a pantser, but you have this minimal amount of plotting that you do, or this brainstorming session that you do before you start writing. I noticed that the big midpoint moment when the promise of the prologue was revealed fell. I don't know if you realize this, pretty much at the 50% mark.
I think I did realize that.
My God.
Well, I wanted it to happen. I wanted it to be that, but it was a matter of, it sort of pretty much did fall perfectly that way. So I was hoping for it to happen. So maybe because I had that subconscious hope that it would happen, that it did. But it was very, I think the hard thing about pacing is I wanted to set up, all the characters and what their problems were and issues and why they both knew this man who suddenly arrives at the office, who we do see in the prologue. But at the same time, I didn't want it to be, just boring setup type thing.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit longer quite a lot longer. I think the first half of the book probably takes place over a few months, whereas the second half of the book, I think it's almost a couple of weeks at the most. So the pacing is, but yeah, it's amazing that it sort of just worked out that way. I didn't know right till the end whether it would, because I thought that the second half of the book would take, because it's quicker in terms of timing. I thought maybe it would be quicker on the page, but with everything that had to come out, it wasn't. So it did work out quite well. Interesting thing is, I wrote the prologue. It changed a bit, the prologue. I wrote the prologue first, and usually I'm very scathing of my own writing. And I remember writing the prologue and thinking, wow, Rach,
nailed it.
It's the best thing you've written for ages. And then I was so upset because when I handed it in, thinking, everyone's going to agree with me. The first thing my agent said when she read it, I don't think you need the prologue. And she said, the prologue, I read the prologue, and then I was just like, well, I don't care about the middle, the getting there. I just want to know what happens, what next kind of thing. And I was like, I think we need it. And the other thing is, I'd written it in my head with I had written a prologue. So that meant that the prologue is in essence the first chapter. It's what draws you into the story. Yeah. Whereas my first my chapter after the prologue to me wasn't a first chapter.
Right.
It was more easing you in and getting to know. Yeah. So I was like, well, if we get rid of the prologue, then that first chapter to me isn't a strong first chapter. And so I did get rid of the prologue in the first structural edit. And then I, changed the first chapters around and stuff. I think we started in Ramona's point of view instead of Deb's, and I did a few different things. And then I said in the copy edits, no, I think it still needs the prologue.
It's hooky.
So I put it back in, and then they said, okay, well, you can have the prologue, but we think it foreshadows too much. So it was a little bit more, it had a little bit more detail in about, what was going, why the reasons and who the person was and all this sort of stuff. And I think the prologue here, I'm just going to check, the last line is, she could not work in the same office as that man.
Yeah.
Whereas originally I had something like he could never find out about Ramona, like, kind of or something like that. And so, it changed, but I fought for it because I do think it was important structurally. So,
yeah, I'm just good on you. I'm thinking about if I had have known that the issue was Ramona.
I mean, to me, I thought it was kind of obvious.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I thought it wasn't one of those things we were, keeping.
Yeah.
But so it's interesting, I think, because you're in you're so much in your head and you know what's sort of, even if you're a pantser and you don't 100% know, by the time you finish the book, you know. But so it's interesting when an editor gets on board and thinks, well, maybe you don't need to know as much as you've given, and you can actually improve the book if you, don't give away so much straight away. And I think that's the whole thing, like with suspense and crime, you need to have all that, but we need it in women's fiction. We need it in romance and stuff as well. So often I think, first draft, maybe I put too much in, and then it's a matter of working out, well, what can and I really hate as a reader, feel like I'm being manipulated to keep reading. So I didn't want to do that either. Like, I hate it when they say, and this happened, but they don't tell you what it is. And, oh, really, that was such a terrible day. Remember when, oh my gosh, and halfway through you're thinking, well, what happened on that terrible day? So, and then you get there and you're like, oh, is that all that happened? So I very much, I like this technique, but I think it can be tricky as well. To me, it felt like it would work for this book. And so, I fought for it. And one thing I always ask myself in edits and major things, this might be useful for people listening, because I think a lot of new writers or aspiring writers think that you have to change everything that the editors say, and that you don't have a say, where that's definitely not the case. I mean, often there is a reason if they don't think something's working, but maybe their way, as I said, they didn't think the prologue was working. Their solution was to scrap it. my solution fell in the middle. So I think they were right. The prologue wasn't working, but I don't think their solution was right. And so I worked out what my, and what I always ask myself when I'm getting a major edit like that, which for me, cutting out the prologue was quite a big section. There was other things, as I said, that I cut out that I was fine with. But so I always ask myself, do I not want to do this? Because in essence, I'm lazy, right? It's hard. Rewriting is hard. I just want to get it perfect the first time. And
You've already done all the work,
Yeah, exactly. It's really hard. So I ask myself, do I not want to do this because I'm lazy and it's actually going to be a hell of a lot of work? Or do I not want to do it because I think the way I had it is actually right for the book? And if it's the first one, then I'll put on my big girl's undies and, get stuck in and whinge and crone and complain about it, do it. But if it's a second, I will say, no, this is why I want to keep it the way it is. And I will fight, pretty much to the death to keep it that way. And most of the times I get it. Very rarely do I, they manage to convince me the other way around. So yeah, it's a balance. You have to, one of the other things I said I think I got rid of in this book was, and this came halfway through that I decided this would happen, that Deb's past with her mum would be that her mum ended up in jail in her early teens and went to jail because she was abusing Deb and she used to be called Munchausen by proxy, but now it's factitious disorder by proxy where people make up, or hurt their kids or whatever, or make their kids sick to get attention and all that kind of stuff. And I thought, yeah, I'll do that because that indicates why she's so protective of Ramona and why she's wanting to be a better mum, but it also could be the spark that made her go to America when her mum got out of jail and she was feeling very vulnerable about, all that sort of stuff. So then what happens when she meets Oscar, made sense. And then my second editor, because I had a different one for structure and copy, said, you know what, this is very dark. There's light stuff and it's a fun book, I think, but there was gaslighting, there's a domestic violence, there's, lying to close family. And, she's like, do we really need a parent's abuse on a child as well? Like this is, poor Deb. We're told as writers that you have to give your characters crap and they have to, we torture them so that then they can recover. But sometimes too much torture. And she said, why did her mum just abandon her? That's not a little thing for a child's mum to walk out and say, hey, I'm choosing other people or a life over looking after you. That's a huge thing. And, but it's simpler and it stopped the whole. So I was like, yeah, that's true. And I've actually got a quote on my wall here. I listen to a lot of writing podcasts, like I'm sure you do too. And one was with Emily Henry. I don't know who she was talking to, but she said, it's not how big the stakes are. It's how personal they are. And so I got that quote I found around the same time. And I think that's really true. So much, we try and overcomplicate things or put too much drama and stuff in and crap and, because we think, well, then they've got lots to overcome. But really that's just kind of detracting from the deep, emotional journey. And so I love that. It's not how big the stakes are, it's how personal they are. And I'm trying to remember that in future.
That's such great advice. I might put that on my wall as
well.
Yeah, really good. It's like, remember that show, Trini and Susanna? And they used to say, just look in the mirror and take one thing off.
Yes. It's a bit like that. So it's exactly, that's the same thing. Take one thing out of your book, maybe.
Yeah. And you also had to take out the Ramona sexuality thing as well. I took that out before I'd finished writing because I realized that I was forcing that in there because I thought, we need to be talking about, important issues and diversity and then I really think that can't be forced. So it didn't work for me. Yeah.
And then I thought, what? I don't need to do that.
No.
We are so, I think, worried about, and it's good. We want diverse books, but we want people to write them who are, come from diverse backgrounds, whether it's age, culture, race, whatever. But I think as writers that, like I'm a white, middle-aged, straight woman. So, the only thing worse could be a white, middle-aged, straight man, right? And so I think the way we get diversity in our books is sprinkling just real character, so I put, and not necessarily obvious. So I've made one of the characters called Naira. I said her parents had an arranged marriage, as we said, Quinn's brother is gay. His partner is called Darpin and Mrs. D is older, So I feel like that is the way we can bring diversity to our books, not in strong point of views and not necessarily exploring, the issues that are unique to a specific, part of our society or whatever. Yeah.
But definitely not from their point of view and not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because we don't want to go there, do we, Rach?
No, exactly.
So talking about the editing process, do you feel like sharing any more about your editorial, perhaps your notes that you received, how you applied
I have
them?
lots and lots of notes.
Oh, goody. Excellent.
I'm just trying to think, and I actually did 3 this is quite a big edit process. So I did what we call developmental edits.
Is that the same as a structural?
It's kind of, but I guess even more big picture kind of before they sent them off to the editor. So it was like in-house, my publisher and the person who just coordinates the editing, they read the book and said, these sort of things may, and one of the things that they say was the developmental edit was a lot about the office. So they said, unfortunately at this stage, the aspect is probably the least successful facet of the story. And I know you were thinking of fleshing out the office setting and characters you've created so they're more fully incorporated into the story, but why don't we actually, get rid of some of them? She goes, a lot goes on in the office. It's immensely relatable and feels authentic, but doesn't really add to the core story. And so that was one of her sort of main things. She said, on top of the hell of a twist, it would also be worth looking at how you build suspense towards that moment. So she was saying, similar to what I said in that beginning, that a lot happens at the end, but, the beginning has to play its part and has to matter as well. And she said, first of all, we need to work out what's the central core of this novel. What diamond exactly are we polishing? And go from there. For me, she said, it's the friendship between the women, and Deb's relationship with her daughter. So the friendship between Deb and Quinn needs a little bit more work at the beginning so we can see why they support each other. And then it fits much better into the betrayal later, if they actually really care. And so I worked, on their sort of relationship. I mean, there's you can't see.
Oh my gosh.
There's just pages and pages of highlighting Quinn's list. So, we mentioned the list did stay in there, the
husband list.
Husband list. But I had a lot more. She said, well, this is a cute idea. I'm not sure it's working in the novel. I'm sorry, I know it went a lot into work, but work went into it, but just doesn't feel like it's fully incorporated to the themes and storyline. Perhaps it feels a bit too cute in contrast to the big emotional journeys of the characters and what we learn. So she wanted me to kind of get rid of the list. And so that was another thing where I was like, no, I want the list, but, I can pare back what I had. And so I had her doing, a lot more kind of
things off the list. But the important thing of the list was the walking of the dog to meet a cute man.
Yeah, exactly.
And if she hadn't have done that, she wouldn't have met Mrs. D.
Exactly. So then I go, well, if I get rid of the list, how does she meet Mrs. D? And to me, well, that feels like that more control. The list, I've got a word that haunts me from my early days of edits. I mean, not edits, rejections.
Rejections.
And one of the things I always got was, this story is too contrived. Like, this feels contrived. So I'm very much, don't want it to be contrived. I want it to sort of flow in. So then we had, just other things in there. And now I had the structural edits, which is with my editor, Lachlan Dobbins, who is fantastic. And I've worked with him on many books for the last few years. He was off on paternity leave, so I didn't have him. And I really missed him because we just click and we get each other. And he's so wonderful. This is an example from his beginning. I'm so excited to work with you again, Rach. So work-wise, and everything I love about your books, engaging, relatable, quirky characters to root for, secrets and lies, deep hurts to address and overcome, plenty of humour, romance and excitement. So he always starts lovely. But even his stuff of, he said, you've outdone yourself. And he went, and then he goes, the biggest, this is interesting. After learning about Deb's New York ordeal, I thought of having Oscar turn up at the Energy Co and be Quinn's handbag guy with twist enough. But the revelation Oscar wasn't Ramona's father. And this is really spoiler territory.
Spoiler, everyone.
The evil twin firmly pushes the work wives into telenovela territory. It's truly nuts in the best possible way. But the biggest challenge is going to make this believable, and then to maintain the tension after the revelation so readers will cling on to the ride to the gripping end. I've got plenty of suggestions to make, but I think the key for me is that we need to pare back some of the smaller coincidental stuff in order that the more important coincidences are believable. So, he said the coincidences that happened were the whole Deb, Oscar, Quinn, like meeting and actually, having that connection. That's quite a coincidence.
Yeah.
But these things happen in real life.
They do.
Like Quinn's relationship. Oh, sorry. So the budgie guy and the vet call it, the budgie that Elijah has is lost. And then the vet happens to be someone who Deb's been on a date with. She said, Mrs. D knowing about Oscar, they're the big things that need to happen because they propel the plot forward, but they're all quite big coincidences. So then he said, we need to cut back on some other things that I had. The other thing he said, also making sure the characters are there for a reason and cutting back on some of the dead or sick partners, tragic upbringings, dead parents. He's like, so many people here.
Take one thing off.
Yeah. And so, he and now his overview is huge. It's things like looking at the timeline and pace. And then there was one big thing in that he actually liked. So I had a chapter from Oscar's point of view, which I really loved, actually. As I said, this book was a joy to write. So I actually had a much more, friendly view of it. And usually as I say most books, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so terrible. I can't believe, anyone would ever read this. But that chapter again, I thought, wow, I was wondering, a few things, how to reveal things. And then I suddenly had, what if we have a chapter from Oscar's point of view? Right. And it was I think it was just before or just after he meets Ramona and her friends. And a whole lot is revealed. It was after he'd had a chat with Quinn and he told Quinn he was married. And then basically it tells you, a few people have said to me, they would love a sequel because they want to see Oscar and Quinn's relationship. That chapter showed that he did have feelings for her, that he struggling with because he was guilty that his wife, he was married. Yeah. But his wife is sick. And so it also showed why he lied to Ramona. So to me, it showed a lot of things. And my the first edit, they said, get that out. We don't need it. It's weird having a point of view from one chapter. But interestingly enough, I read Holly Ringland's book recently. I'm sure he had a chapter from a random point of view. Yeah. So the problem with getting rid of that chapter was the second editor didn't read that. And a lot of stuff in that chapter was very important to, as I said, so then I had to put that chapter. So I'd gotten rid of it without fully working out how to put all the other stuff in. So when he read it, he felt, well, there's some things that aren't explained in this book. And I told him, that's because I had this chapter that I loved. And I sent it to him and he's like, I love it too. I think it works. But I went back again to my publisher and they were like, no, we really, really, really don't want it. And that was so that was one of the things I did give them. But then I had to really work hard to make sure that everything that was really important in Oscar's story, not so much his feelings about Quinn, there was no way I could really get that on the page.
I do feel like that's implied though.
Yeah, it's implied, but I got the feeling
because he wouldn't have offered to walk the dog and do all those things if he didn't have some interest.
Yes. And that's good because I wanted to make it implied, but you definitely knew in his point of view, his guilt, kind of how he was feeling about it. Yeah. But so I had to then put that sort of stuff about why he lied to Ramona into Deb's point of view and all that. So, that was basically the structural and the developmental edits. So is that
right? That is such gold. I think this is why people need to read the book before they listen to the podcast because, it just all makes sense. And it's that when this podcast comes into its own because people can listen to you talking about those things and say, oh, that's how you do it. And if they're struggling with something themselves where they think,
I love your podcast because it is, if you have read the book, it's definitely, I've listened to it, when I have read the book and I've listened to it when I haven't read the book and it's always gold. But if you've read the book, it really does enhance your podcast experience.
Yeah, I think so too. So go get the book, people. You need to read this one because that's all such gold. Thank you. And Lachlan sounds like a dream to work with.
He is. I love him so much.
We have another listener question from Renee Black, and anyone who does send in a question, I'll give a little shout out and put in the show notes a link to your Instagram. So thank you, Renee, for your question.
Her question is around the two genres that you write in. She would love to know, do you come up with a storyline first and then decide to write it as a rural romance or women's fiction? Or do you already have the genre in mind before coming up with the storyline?
That's such a great question. And I'm going to go back a little bit to when I first wrote a women's fiction novel and I was contracted for rural romance. But what happened is I had an idea that didn't fit. It was the Patterson Girls, and it was supposed to be, well, to me, I came up with the title. That was one of the ones that came up with the title. It was the Patterson's Curse, or Patterson's Curse based on weed. That I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and she said, that would make a great title for a book. And I said, yeah, it would. And I was writing rural romance. So I immediately thought, well, it's got to be a curse. The book's called Patterson's Curse. It's got to be a love curse. And again, I think I was writing another book at the time. Often what would happen to me, and I think it started to happen again, which is a blessing, is that I'd be writing a book and then a midpoint of that book, I would suddenly get this idea that I absolutely loved and thought was way better than the books that I was currently writing. But I was contracted, so I had to just push on and finish. But it was always comforting to know what I was going to write next. And then for the last few years, that hasn't been as strong. But now it's coming back. So I'm happy about that. So what happened is I had time to let this idea mull, I guess, and to be thinking about what while I was finishing writing the other one. And I suddenly sort of thought about a family curse instead of a love curse. So the love curse kind of wasn't working for me. And then I won't say what this curse is because we're not spoiling that book as well as But I realized I needed 3 or 4 sisters to sort of discover a curse when they're packing up their mum's things that their mum had kept from them. And then that throws them into a spiral of doubt about their lives, and they all decide to try and disprove the curse separately. And so I realized, well, this book, I was so excited about the idea and the topic, but it wasn't a real romance. So then I went to my publisher and said, look, I know I'm contracted for rural, but can I do this? And she was really encouraging, which I know is not always the case. I've had other friends who tried to, ask to do something different, and their publisher's like, nah, just stay in your lane. You're doing well in that area. Let's not, rock the boat. Just keep going with what you're doing. So she said, yep, go for it. And I did it. And it was a challenge, but it was really enjoyable, writing slightly different. I mean, I think they're very closely linked genres because women's fiction, they're all about relationships.
Yeah.
And then women's fiction sometimes have strong romantic elements. But so that's what kind of happened with that one. And then so from then on, I was contracted for rural romance and women's fiction. So I knew, I do think in terms of, I think now in terms of before I'm starting, I don't like an idea never comes and I think, oh, which will that be? It's always so obvious to me, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I'm also, so I probably do. I mean, I think ideas come and I guess I subconsciously think, well, is that going to be better as a rural or is that going to be better as women's fiction? But it's more that I'm I don't know if I'm answering this question properly, but
this is good. So do you write the 2 books a year?
I did for a while and then I got sort of burnt out. So now I'm back to not back to 1 a year. I'm now doing 1 a year at the moment.
And are they alternating or?
Yeah, they have been. I had a couple of years where it was women's fiction 2 in a row and no rural. And so I can't remember why. I think we decided, I think the publisher was kind of quite encouraging me to just focus on the women's fiction. But I really do love writing rural romance as well. And I do think mixing up the both of them, as I said, they're different in ways, but they're close enough. I think mixing up both helps me. Like when I'm writing women's fiction, I wish I was writing rural romance and vice versa. And there's a joy in writing a romance, but it's a different joy in writing, women's relationships. So I like doing both. But the publisher was thinking, let's just focus on building you as a contemporary general fiction author. But then the outcry from my rural readers was so, the outcry, they wanted, where's the next rural coming kind of thing. And so we realized that people really love the rural romances and I love them too. So I decided then to, alternate the books pretty much.
Is one of them easier to write than the other?
Good question. I would say no, as we said, nothing's easy to write. But in some ways, rural romance or romance in general, because some of my later ones are veering less from rural-ish and more just really straight contemporary romance set in a small town, the romance some romance writers hate this, that there's, that if you say there's a formula, and I'm not saying it's a formula because that makes me think you have to have this on page 2 and this on page 5 but there's a general, a promise, I suppose, of romance. It's a promise of crime. It's like if you read a crime book and someone dies in the first page, if you don't know who the killer is by the end, you're annoyed, right?
So readers expect expect certain things.
With the romance, you go in that to know you're having a happy ever after at the end, or happy for now, and that you're going to go on a journey with two people who, are going to fall in love. They're going to have obstacles along the way. So, and it's usually going to be like, they're going to meet somehow. There's going to be a kiss probably. In most of my books, there's a love scene. So I know that I have certain things to kind of follow. I suppose like it's a loose structure. Where I don't have that structure so much with women's fiction because it changes depending on the story, how many point of view characters I do and all that. So that makes it a little bit harder, I think. Although sometimes it's the flip side, it's harder, but it's also more freeing. Whereas I know, I've got to follow certain things in the romance, if that makes sense. So yeah.
I bet your publisher was really glad they said yes to you writing your first contemporary fiction, women's
I think
fiction.
They were. It works out quite well.
It did. Just for listeners who don't know, but that book, The Patterson Girls, went on to win an ABIA.
Yeah, Australian Book Award for General Fiction. Yeah,
that's right. In 2015,
I think it was 2016. It was written in 2016. Yeah,
and did that also win a Ruby Award?
Yes, it did. Ruby Award, and I think an ARA Award maybe. So maybe I'm making that up. That was
very successful. So all publishers out there who are saying, please don't, go outside your genre. Yeah. Look what can happen if you
exactly. You've got to be open to possibilities.
Not that I'm telling publishers how to suck eggs, but I do hear from friends who are writers who, they do want to write something a little bit different. And I totally get from the publisher's point of view that they're the ones that have to market this and they know where it fits on the shelf and all of that sort of stuff. And it's managing expectations and there's all those issues of, well, do I write something different with a pseudonym or oh God, it must get so complicated.
True.
But I guess now your readers know that they're either going to get one or the other and they probably love both.
Well, I think some people do. I do think that I'm not mathematical, but it's the Venn diagram where you've got circles that overlap.
Yeah.
I think, there's a lot of people who or romance readers are a breed of readers where they read so voraciously.
Oh.
And, they will, if you love rural romance, they will buy every single rural romance book that comes out. Whereas I feel like people, and so this is very, obviously there's exceptions.
Yeah.
But I feel like general fiction readers are different to those genre readers. Like say if you read crime, you read usually a lot of crime. Whereas I notice in sort of general contemporary fiction, often they're people who go to book clubs. They might read 1 or 2 books a month and that it's not their main sort of thing that they do. Often it's teachers who will read in the summer holidays, but then not read anything for the rest of the year because they're too busy doing all the other stuff that they have to do.
Yeah.
And so I think the romance readers are more glued on and they will probably read the women's fiction too. I also get that some people, it still amuses me when some people think, oh, no, I don't read romance. I don't like romance. And it's like most of my romance books, most of the romance books that I read from other people I know or don't know but admire, they're not what people think I think of a romance. My rural romances explore issues and other community relationships and, just as much as the general fiction. It's just the main plot thread is slightly different focus. So I think they would like them if they gave them a try, but a lot of people think they only read specific things.
Yeah, but the romance writers and the romance readers, they know what's what. And with our mutual friend Penelope Janu, we talk about this all the time and say, these romance readers, they are voracious. I've got a friend who's an artist and we were at a gallery opening last year and she said, we were talking about books and she said, do you want to see my guilty pleasure?
Yeah.
And she showed me her phone and she went into her iBooks and it was just page upon page upon page of romance novels. And I said, that's a wonderful guilty pleasure. And I know many romance authors who would just love to see what's on your phone.
I've had people show me that sort of stuff too as well. It's so funny. But I think that what we're seeing now all of a sudden, and whether you love or hate book talk, TikTok, is that romance, the younger generation are going, they're loud and proud that they want to read romance.
They are.
And, you know, and I think that's something that's never happened before in terms of, you know, even when everyone was reading 50 Shades of Grey or whatever, it was still, my guilty pleasure. I can't believe I'm reading this crap, you know, thing. Whereas the young people who are reading romance, like in the late teens, early 20s, are not ashamed at all. And I
out and proud.
Really. Yeah.
Isn't it wonderful? I love book talk, and I love the young people, Rach.
I know. So do I. I just hope that, you know, they branch out and don't stop just reading Colleen Hoover so that they can.
Come and read your Australian Colleen Hoovers, people.
Yes.
People like Rachel, people like Penelope.
Exactly.
I have one last question for you. Did writing The Work Wives teach you anything new about writing? After 29 books.
I actually just saw something. It taught me, not necessarily new, but it reminded me of things as a stand. It reminded me that I really have to trust my gut and trust the magic and not make any drastic changes or question why I'm doing things in the first draft, because things happen. Like, as I said, Mrs. D I never planned her, and I don't know why I decided that the first thing on the husband list is to get a dog. I don't know why I decided that Quinn didn't just go to a rescue, you know, dog rescue place, or that her brother and his partner had a dog. Instead, I decided that she couldn't get a dog herself because her brother's partner was allergic. Now, why did that? Who the hell knows? But also maybe it's because it's difficult for characters, you know? It's like, well, if she can just easily walk a dog, it's not quite as, you know, fun. Or if she's already walking a dog, it's not. So then I decided that I would just have an elderly neighbour have a big dog that needed walking and she could no longer really handle it. But that elderly neighbour became monumental in the plot. People have commented on the lovely friendship between Quinn and Mrs. D. But also, as I said, she is very important in the reveal and stuff. And when I brought her onto the page, I did not know how I was going to have everything come out. Yet, you know, that sort of works. So I think I need to remember, not to censor myself in the first draft and just to go with whatever happens. The other thing is not to worry too much about what's coming. Because, you know, so often, and that's why I can't plot personally myself, because I start then thinking, well, that's going to be stupid. That's not going to work. And that's going to be contrived, as I said. But if I actually get to that point in the book, often it's changed anyway. So my worries are no longer valid, or it's not a problem because I've worked out by then how to do it. So if I think too far ahead, I've realized I just really have to trust the process, trust the magic. And it's hard because I'm thinking about my next book and I'm like, well, I really don't know exactly what the plot, you know, what's going to uncover. And I have to remind myself that that's okay, because that's pretty much how I've written all my other books. And, you know, some things will reveal themselves to me if I just trust it. And I know that my favorite authors write this way too, like Marianne Keyes and Liane Moriarty. And, you know, they always write books which I think are amazing. So I know that it's a matter of just your trust in the process.
Because you've listened to all the podcast episodes, you would know that a lot of the authors that have come on have said exactly the same thing. It's just trust the process. And I think as a new writer, or for me, as yet unpublished, that's one of the hardest things to learn, is to trust that process.
Yeah.
But it
because
works,
it's scary.
right?
And it does miraculously. I think, you know, if you're a reader, or if you've been a diehard reader for a long time and you read lots, you intuitively know about story. And so there's so much stuff going on, like when we're sleeping, when we're doing all the other things, that, you know, our brain is still working and we're away from the page. So you've just got to trust that. And that sometimes means you write something maybe that's not right, but then if you feel that gut that's not right, I think you work out a different way. The other thing, one more practical thing I learned here, I actually didn't learn this through the book, but I tried it with this book. It's something I learned when reading Sally Hepworth's last book, I think, not the one that just came out, but her last book. And we're friends. So I said to her, oh my gosh, I've noticed she doesn't refer to the time. It was The Younger Wife.
The Younger Wife.
Not refer to the timeline one at all, except at the very end, the beginning. Sorry, at the beginning it says like 1 year, says something happens, and then the next chapter is 1 year later or something like that, or 1 year earlier. And then you kind of just go through. You don't, you know, know how many months and how many weeks. And she doesn't really refer to, is it Wednesday or is it Saturday? And timeline is something that always trips me up, and that I just can't seem to work it out in the beginning. Like I never know because I'm not planning. So I don't do it then. And then it just confuses me throughout. And inevitably my editors will be like, okay, well, she's had a baby, but she was only pregnant for 5 months. So like things like this. And I'm like, oh, damn it. Or, something happened on Saturday, but then I'm thinking, well, when, those sort of things that really can trip me up. And I realized Sally didn't refer to it at all. And I said to her, did you work this out? Like, what? And she said, I never do. I've never noticed it before. But she said that she may have in the very early books. But yeah, she just basically just doesn't refer to it. And so if you think back in the work lives, I don't really refer to it either, apart from the very beginning, it says 3 months earlier. And then you kind of know when you get to that midpoint.
Yeah.
And there's very little things like, I think I mentioned school holidays. It's a bit vague, but there's not like, oh, this happened on Monday, and so it has to be Tuesday the next day. It's very vague.
Yeah.
And so I think that works. From now on. Absolutely. Yeah.
The only other thing you had to do in terms of timeline that was pivotal to the plot was having Ramona being 15 and that coinciding with when Oscar was in New York and Ramona was potentially conceived. So
and that's true as well. Yeah, I had to make sure that was right. And that's another choice, I guess, where I decided not to put a specific year on it.
Yes.
I mean, it's to do with COVID as well, because if I'd done it pre-COVID, or I can't remember what, it had to be pre-COVID basically. Yeah. It had to be pre-COVID because it's set in an office, or it had to be post-COVID. And when I was writing it, we weren't really post-COVID. We still aren't completely post-COVID. And people were, not in their office a lot of the time. So you can't have a story where people have real strong work friendship, or the dramas that happen at work if people are not in the office. So I thought it had to be post. So I tried post originally, and then I got to the end, and there was a few little references I quite liked about the COVID in there. Not distressing, but things like Deb liked working from home because she got to walk around the block once. But then I realized I also, because she moves around, didn't want her to have. She can't have known Quinn as long as the COVID has gone out. Yeah, because otherwise they would have and they ruined a whole lot of things. So when I realized that, so they couldn't have known each other more than a couple of years, and they would have had to if it was post-COVID. I just decided it's just easier not to put COVID in at all, and to not put a time on the book at all.
And exactly, and that's what's going to make this book evergreen. Like,
hopefully,
but it's not pivotal. COVID, whether it's
I really
post
or unless it is pivotal. I don't really know why.
Yeah,
does it now? I've learned that as well. Like I think in one of my other books, I've got the year, and then I look back now and I go, well, why do I need that year?
Yeah, and some people use years to orient their own writing, but
and obviously if you're doing dual timeline on historic, you kind of need it.
Yeah. Well, Sally really broke that rule with her latest one, which I'm listening to on audiobook at the moment, The Soulmate, because that's all before, then, now. What is it? Now.
Now and then, or
now and then and after. Yeah. She must have had fun with that one. Now, I'm just going to give a little plug for the Rights for Women podcast, because I know secret inside information that you've just had a chat with Sally Hepworth, and I spoke to Pam earlier today, and she's editing it. So that will be coming out really soon. And I can't wait to listen to that chat between you and Sally about, is it about the soulmate, or are you just having a general writing chat?
It's kind of like, it was general. It was more how we write differently.
Great.
Because we are very different in terms of the number of drafts we do.
She's a plotter, isn't she?
She's a plotter. I'm a pantser. Mostly, but we both realized, I think there's a spectrum. Everyone's on the spectrum somewhere. So it was more about the editing, like differences, because of the first draft. So it's about both our books a little bit, where we got the ideas from, but then the writing process, how it was different. Yeah.
Can't wait for that one. That'll be coming out soon, people. So go over to that podcast and have a listen. Rachael, it has been an absolute delight speaking with you, and I could probably just keep talking all day. It's just so great. I loved the book. Everyone should go and buy it. What's next for you? Got another one in the works?
I've got a rural romance coming out. As I said, it's not really very rural. It's between a nun and a tattooist.
Oh my God. I love the sound of that.
Yeah.
A tattooist.
I call it my rural romance, Australian contemporary sound and music, basically. We have all the characters. at the beginning, the hero has a friends with benefits that's like the Baroness. His brother is very much in there. He's like Uncle Max. He's not a single dad, but he does foster with his brother delinquent boys. And yeah, of course, you have the nun. So it was a lot of fun to write. And the nuns go on TikTok.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. I bet you had a lot of fun with the dialogue.
I did.
And I'm sure Holly Ringland will appreciate the reference to a tattooist in there as well.
Yes, given her novel.
And what about your online book club? You've got a big event coming up, haven't you?
Yes. So I run an online book club called Rachael Johns Online Book Club with my friend author, Anthea Hodgson. And we've got almost 5,000 people. It's a very active, great group. We do read a book a month and talk about it. And no, you don't have to do it. It's not homework. But next year, for the very first time, we're having an in-person retreat in Harndorf in the Adelaide Hills. And there's still tickets available. There's going to be about 12 authors, including us there. There's going to be book discussions, book quizzes, maybe some bookish craft. It's just going to be a real fun weekend. So yeah, you can find out information about that as rachaeljohnsbookclubretreat.com.
That sounds amazing. And of course, we'll put all of those links into the show notes, as well as the books that Rachael mentioned, the bestseller code and the book about the archetypes. I'll get that link from you as well, Rachael.
Yeah.
People can look those up. Thank you, my love. Have a wonderful Christmas and I hope you get a break over the summer with your beautiful boys. And
thank you.
I will hopefully catch up with you in 2023.
Excellent. Thanks so much.
Pleasure. Oh, it sounded like we cheersed then.
That was like, yes.
There you go, Rachael Johns. I really hope you enjoyed that deep dive with Rachael. I love that she was happy to go into so much detail, even though it meant spoilers, and all of those editorial notes were just brilliant. If you're just starting out as a writer, or like me, you've yet to be published, you really have no idea what to expect when it comes to editorial notes. I mean, we hear about structural edits and copy edits, but Rachael reading out her actual notes from her editors was so insightful. So do make sure you grab a copy of The Workwives or pop it on your Christmas list so you can get the most out of this episode and really see how Rachael applied all of those craft aspects we talked about. You'll find links to the writing books that Rachael talked about in the episode, along with information about her book club retreat and the Rights for Women podcast episode between Rachael and Sally Hepworth. So jump into the show notes on your podcast app or on the website writersbookclubpodcast.com. I want to give a shout out to the listeners who sent the questions in today, Deb Jordan and Renee Black. Thank you so much. I love it when you guys send in your questions. They're always so good, so thoughtful. I've put links to both of those authors' Instagram accounts in the show notes, so go and give Deb and Renee a follow too. Renee's debut novel, On the Down Low, is coming out in February 2023, so congratulations, Renee. That's so exciting. Let's all make sure we support Renee at launch time. You can follow her on Instagram at Renee_black_writes. And I see Deb's been working hard on her writing and has a first draft done and dusted as well. So well done, Deb. Go give Deb a follow as well. It's Deb_Jordan_writer. Now to our last writer for the year on the podcast. You might remember last year I interviewed Marcus Zuzak, and rather than focus on one book, we had more of a wide-ranging chat about writing craft across all of his books. It was pretty extraordinary. For the last episode of 2022, I'm doing the same thing, but this time with the incredibly talented Kate Forsyth. Let me tell you a little bit about Kate. Dr. Kate Forsyth is an award-winning author, poet and storyteller. She has a doctorate of creative arts in fairy tale studies, which has led to an amazing body of novels inspired by fairy tales and myths, but definitely not as you know them. Her most recent novel is The Crimson Thread, a reimagining of the Minotaur in the Labyrinth myth. It's set in Crete during the Nazi invasion and occupation of World War II, and it's absolutely fascinating. Her other historical novels include Beauty and Thorns, which is a reimagining of Sleeping Beauty, told in the voices of 4 women of the pre-Raphaelite circle of artists and poets. Then we have The Wild Girl, which is the story of the forbidden romance behind the Grimm brothers' fairy tales, which was named Most Memorable Love Story of 2013, and Bitter Greens, which is a reinvention of Rapunzel, which won the 2015 American Library Association Award for Best Historical Fiction, and it also is just such a fabulous novel. Kate has also written non-fiction books, books for middle grade children, and picture books, many of which have garnered awards. So overall, Kate is really just quite extraordinary, and I can't wait to dive into the craft and process she brings to her writing. I'm going to bring you this episode in that drowsy, dreamy week between Christmas and New Year when you're in the mood to reflect on your writing and absorb some wisdom. As Susan Vreeland said about Kate, surrender yourself to a master storyteller. Speaking of that week after Christmas, it's always my biggest reading week of the year. I just sit around inhaling all the books I've received, gifted to myself. If you'd like to add Kate's latest novel, The Crimson Thread, to your Christmas haul, I have a copy to give away. To enter, go to Writers Book Club Instagram or Facebook and look for the giveaway post. Entries close on December 12th, but of course, if you're listening to this podcast in the future, there's a new giveaway every month. So follow me on Instagram or Facebook and you'll always be in the know. And of course, you can pick up a copy of The Crimson Thread wherever you buy your books, or any of Kate's books for that matter. Okay, that is it for this month. You'll find all the show notes for this episode right here in your podcast app or on the website at writersbookclubpodcast.com. I recorded today's episode on the beautiful unceded lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll catch you at the end of the month. Until then, happy writing.